Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for attending our Using Equivalent Wire and Connectors to Save Time and Money webinar. My name is Ryan Wood, the Content Marketing Manager here at Epec. Before we get started, I just want to let you all know that you'll be muted during the presentation. If you have any questions as we move along, please enter them into the questions panel, which is located in the webinar control panel, and we will try to get to them all at the end of the presentation. If we don't have time to go through all of your questions, we'll be sure to reply back to you by email. Also, we'll be recording this webinar and we'll be posting both the recording and the slides on our website and YouTube channel. Our presenter today is Stephen Goodman, our User Interface and Cable Assembly Product Manager. Stephen is a mechanical engineer with a Bachelor of Science and MBA from Northeastern. As the User Interface and Cable Assembly Product Manager here at Epec, Stephen works closely with customers to provide solutions to specific problems during design consultation, and where needed, helping with the creation of specific designs. So without further ado, I will pass it on over to Stephen.
Thank you, Ryan. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Steve Goodman, and I'm one of the product managers here with Epec. Today, we're going to be talking about some ways that you can save time and money using equivalent wire and connectors for your custom cable assembly. So a bit about the specifics we're going to touch on today. First will be some capabilities for our wire harnessing division. Next, we'll be talking about equivalency in cable assemblies, what that means and how it can benefit your product cost and timeline. Next, we'll be talking about some specific wire and connector options as well as some design solutions for your project. Lastly, we'll go through the specific steps to get started with your custom build. So first, we'll touch on some capabilities here at Epec. Epec is a world-class manufacturer of custom cable assemblies and wire harnesses. We specialize in all types of UL hookup wires, custom overmolded cables, medical cables, and a variety of D-sub, RJ45, USB, etc. types of cables. We support nearly all custom cable assembly types, range from power cables, ribbon cables, and even devices where we're taking a PCB or PCBA and embedding that within an overmold. All of these are capabilities for us here at Epec that we can support you and your project on. One of the benefits that Epec can offer you and your project is the fact that we extrude our own UL approved wire in-house. The reason that that's such a cost and delivery advantage for our customers is the fact there's no middleman. We hold the UL certification, we extrude our own wire, we have all the raw materials available in stock so we can go and make any combination of these wires, these conductors, and shielding to get you the final completed multi-conductor cable that you need for your product. We're able to help lower costs through the use of automated equipment. This is not just for assembly, but for final test. Some of the equipment that we use includes automated wire strippers, crimp, cut, termination machines, as well as full circuit identification type capabilities here. Obviously, you're building a couple hundred pieces. Some of these techniques and capabilities will help lower costs, but we're able to offer extremely low pricing and favorable lead times on high volumes that range from 5,000 to even 50,000 pieces and higher using these types of equipment. Specific to our test capabilities, 100% of our wire harnesses go through continuity test. As we all know, these wire harnesses are dumb devices, and the majority of them don't have any circuitry in them other than just wires and some crimps. With those, a simple continuity test is more than sufficient. For an application where we need to test high voltage limits or maybe do some kind of functionality testing, we do have advanced electrical test capabilities and can develop our own electrical test fixtures that can do exactly what you need to be compliant with your project. High pot testing is one concern we all have, especially when we're dealing with high pin count or a high density connector. Anytime we're doing a high pot test with more than a dozen or 2 dozen connections, that testing can take hours and if not days doing it by hand. Our automated test stations here can do every combination of high pot testing around all the adjacent pins, which is very common in military and aerospace type applications. So depending on what you're trying to do and what your electrical test requirements are, the odds are we have a way to test your cable harness. Now we'll touch more on the actual meaning of equivalency in cable assemblies and how that helps our customers. So when it comes to looking at substitutions or an equivalent, what we want to consider is the different components or the cable anatomy. The first thing is the bulk wire. That's typically one of the easiest to cross. Our customers know a lot more about the application than us, so we typically work with our customers to better understand what they're trying to do, what the design goals and requirements are before we can recommend an appropriate substitution. But typically the bulk cable is the first place we look at to save time and money for our customers with equivalents. The next thing that we'll look at are the connector housings and crimp terminals. There are situations where Epec has an existing equivalent or substitution that is a form, fit, function, drop-in replacement. There's other times that our equivalent may meet 2/3 of the performance requirements, but because of the cost or timeline needs of our customers, it's an attractive solution for our customers. And then the last thing that we can help substitute and recommend an alternate for is the actual overmolded material itself. Most of the time this comes to the surface when our customers send us requirements where they're making an overmold by hand using a 2-part potting or epoxy compound. A lot of times those off-the-shelf 2-part mixtures are expensive. Sometimes they're volatile or have toxic issues in mixing them. So what we'll recommend doing is actually using our standard PVC material that can chemically bond to the bulk wire. So in terms of substitutions, bulk wire, connector housings, and crimp terminals are the most common. And on occasion, we can recommend a substitution for the overmold. But typically, we're just going to recommend our standard PVC overmold material. Let's talk a bit about the actual definition of equivalents and substitutes. This is important because when we engage with our customers and even our internal sales staff here, there are different interpretations and meanings of the word equivalent and substitute. And this is important because when we're discussing options with our customers, we want to make sure it's clear whether we're recommending an actual equivalent or something that could be deemed as a substitute. And we'll go over some specifics here. According to Merriam-Webster, though, the equivalent definition is something that is virtually identical in effect or function. To us, that would be a drop-in replacement that is a form, fit, function, identical replacement. A substitute may be something that takes place of or function of another, and in our view, it may not have the exact same performance, but it will work in our customers' applications. So the next question would be, are these 3 cups of coffee equivalent? Now, again, this is important because depending on who you ask, they may or may not give you the same answer. Again, if you're from New England, you may have opinions on what coffee is best, but I assure you, if this is for breakfast, you're going to want one of these beverages, versus if you're looking for a caffeine boost, another one's going to be more appropriate. So when it comes to equivalency, we tell customers that there are varying degrees of equivalency. And in our industry, that is whomever has design authority ultimately makes that determination. So as we said, if this is a breakfast meal, I personally would prefer coffee of this variety. Or if it's a night drive and we're going somewhere or coming home, I'd personally prefer a Red Bull. But at At the end of the day, we at Epec are trying to figure out what you're trying to accomplish using equivalence. Is it to lower the price? Is it to reduce your lead time? Or is it to decrease supply chain risk and qualify an equivalent component? Still, there is some reluctance to use equivalence in our industry, understandably so. Some of the reasons go something to the tune that the system's already qualified, that ship has sailed, and we cannot requalify a new cable to save X amount of money. There are instances where there's literally not enough time to requalify. And also there's instances where the equivalents that we're considering don't have the right or same performance. And all of these are understandable. But in terms of reluctance, the things that we can control and then educate our customers on is the fact that our equivalents are not cheap and that there is some reluctance at our customers to approve the equivalents. And that means we at Epec need to work with our customers to understand the design objectives and send data or samples to help increase that confidence. So again, here at Epec, we have a number of connector and wire options that can help save our customers time and money. The first question a lot of times we get from our customers is, how do I know if an equivalent exists? There's 4 questions here that we can help review with you to better answer that. If the answer is yes to any of these, the odds are that we do have an equivalent option. So the first question is, can you consider a PVC jacket or a wire that's rated to 300 volts and 105 degrees C? Another question is there a UL or an AWM, that stands for appliance wiring material, number printed on the wire jacket? Is there a connector that's common that looks like something you already have in your home or office? Or is one of the connectors you need manufactured by one of the large name brand connector manufacturers? If the answer is yes to any of these questions, the odds are we do have an equivalent option.
For equivalent options, we have a variety of standard household and industrial connectors. These include, as I said before, metric, USB, ribbon cables, to power cables, to PS2 cables, even some standard RF cables like SMAs. So there are thousands of part numbers that we have potential equivalents for. The best thing to do would be to engage with our sales and engineering team to review options and recommendations that we can make. So it's not just components and connectors that we have equivalent options for. As I said before, we extrude our own UL wire. That, by definition, is equivalent to some of the UL name brand wires that you can get from the likes of Mauser and DigiKey. So the most common for us, as I said before, have PVC insulation and jacket materials, but there's several other UL rated materials that we can support. This includes cross-linked polyethylene, XLPE, PTFE, which is the chemical name for Teflon, FEP, and also silicone. There are existing UL wires that exist in the industry today that we can produce in just a few weeks that may work just fine in your application. Now, if an existing off-the-shelf wire is not what you're looking for and you're looking to add some level of customization, we can absolutely do this in as short as 3 weeks. The areas we help our customers with custom extrusions involves the number of twisted pairs that are individually shielded and then laid within an overall braided shield. So this is important when our customers need 5 28 gauge twisted pairs that are all individually shielded, all inside an overall shield with a drain. Getting that level of customization can take 15 to 20 weeks with some of these wire manufacturers that are available through the online distribution places. However, we can make this custom extrusion with a UL rating printed on the jacket in as short as 3 weeks. So that's really how we lower lead times, is we make the product ourselves. We keep all the raw materials and tooling in stock. and we're ready to pull the trigger and build these. The truth is, a lot of these connectors don't really take 10 weeks or 18 weeks or 24 weeks to make. These manufacturers quote these manufacturing standard lead times as such, just because that's how long it takes to get into the manufacturing queue. These companies like TE, Molex, JST, and Hiroshi, they make hundreds, if not thousands, of different part numbers that they're expected to keep in stock. We've gone and just identified those top 10 or 20% most common part numbers and created our own equivalents that are form, fit, function, drop-in replacements to many of these. When it comes to pricing, obviously using the brand name wire and brand name connector is the most expensive option. Epec can help offer an equivalent wire and equivalent connector, saving both time and money. And in doing so, that represents the lowest cost path forward for these types of products. There are situations where it does not make sense to use an equivalent connector, and we'll actually use the brand name Molex or TE connector, and all we'll do is just use our own UL wire. It will assemble the same, it'll look the same and act just the same as the brand name wire, but in doing so, saving our customers a bunch of time and money. So this next analysis we're going to show you here is a fictitious example, but it goes and actually gives some context to what we're trying to explain here. So the important thing to point out here is that if you specify a brand name wire on your drawing and your drawing forbids any equivalence, we will quote with that drawing specified wire. Even if this costs us $80 a cable, even if this means we have to buy 10,000 feet of said wire, only to use 500 or 1,000 feet of it. When we can use our equivalent wire, we're then less susceptible to the impacts of MOQs, and we don't need to build 10,000 feet of wire if we're just going to build a few hundred or 1,000 pieces. So that's really where we save our customers most of their money, is offsetting the impacts of MOQs from the standard off-the-shelf components and hardware. When it comes to actually a brand name versus equivalent connector, those price changes are a lot smaller, but it's really just because the off-the-shelf connector may be 50 cents and our equivalent is 20 cents, whereas the wire can be $500 to $1,000 per spool and be thousands of linear feet. So overall, Epec can help provide options to our customers to give them visibility into both equivalent connectors and wire, and the cost savings because of that. Next, we'll talk about some specific examples and design solutions to help our customers better understand our options here. So before you start, I need to make sure it's clear to everybody that some products can't be substituted, and there's a lot of reasons for that. The odds are, though, if you're coming to us, you've done your due diligence, and you understand where you're at in the overall process of finding the right connector. So before engaging with Epec, it's important for our customers to do a little homework on their own. Otherwise, things can slow down and us not really get an effective solution agreed upon. So the first question we'd ask is your connector single sourced? If that's not a question you can answer, we can help do an analysis, but ultimately, if there's only one vendor in the world who makes this connector, there's a chance that we may not have a substitute for it. And there's a lot of reasons there, but it sounds like it's highly specialized. With highly specialized components and connectors, there's usually some kind of proprietary design feature, proprietary material, or an installation technique. For those situations, we don't necessarily have a substitute or equivalent, but we can make recommendations about what is possible. Another point I want to make is just because an equivalent exists, it doesn't always save time or money. And that's usually the analysis that needs to be done to support that is basically quoting this across a larger volume and analyzing where those price breaks and cost savings can occur. If you're trying to build 100 cables, I can't necessarily commit that our solution is going to save a bunch of time and money. But if we look at that same solution across 50,000 units, there's a good chance that with our equivalents, we could save time and money. And lastly, and most importantly, if there is no equivalent today and you need a certain connector, we do have options to tool up and make almost any equivalent connector. We find this is most beneficial in situations where our customers have an obsolete connector, something that maybe they're reverse engineering from an old piece of equipment. The good news is we have a solution, but the bad news is the budget and timeline is not necessarily favorable. For products where we have to go and reverse engineer and tool up a connector, it can be a few $1,000s to even $20,000 or $30,000. The timeline to do that can be a few weeks to a few months. So it's important to review your options and understand really what you're trying to accomplish with the use of your equivalent and substitute connectors. Ways that we can go through selecting an equivalent wire and connector are very simple. It's first starting, what are your voltage and temperature requirements? Typically, most of the cables and connectors we deal with are rated for up to 300 volts and 105 degrees C. That covers probably 80, 85, 90% of the projects we deal with. For those that don't, we're either looking at a 600 volt or 1,000 volt rated cable. Another question would be better understanding what the requirements are for your UL wire and your mil-spec. There's even situations where our customers will specify a UL or mil-spec that isn't actually a requirement. It's just something that we learned was used on a previous project. And in doing so, and through the discussions we have with our customers, we can better understand what the true design requirements are and ways we can help you. It's also important to know when we're looking at equivalent options, is the connector that you've considered an industry standard. For example, if you plan to use a USB-C type connector or an RJ45 or some type of D-sub connector, we have numerous options for equivalents there. Versus if you're going and using a highly specialized circular connector with 23 pins and a shield that's then terminated to the braid, we may not have an exact drop-in replacement there. So it's important to know that when considering equivalents, the more likely that this is an industry standard connector or wire, the more options we're going to have. And lastly, what we want to discuss with our customers is what's unique about the application. Some customers say there's nothing, it's just a boring wire that's going from point A to point B. Other customers want to take this cable, throw it in an autoclave, bend it 1,000 times, shoot it in a rocket to the moon, who knows? But we want to know exactly what your application is so that we can better understand the options that we have. The biggest takeaway for us is the fact that whoever has design authority, they are the ones who will approve or reject whatever alternate connector and wire that we're proposing. The next thing we want to touch on is the rationale for choosing a certain wire type. Here at Epec, we receive hundreds of requests for quote every month. Some of these requests for quote come in with very unique design requirements. Sometimes that's intentional, sometimes it's accidental. This particular example gives us 5 different wire types that are all used in the same harness. We reviewed the application and it became clear the customer only needed hookup wire rated for 105 degrees C. This is important because if we did not have a conversation and we quoted this, this probably would have been a $500 harness. With Epec using our standard UL 1007-1569 wire that is PVC and rated to 105 degrees C, we can bring the cost of this down by almost 80% and give our customer an attractive solution to move forward. So we ask, how did we end up in this place? Why was this wire chosen? And a lot of times it's because that's what the wire on the last project used. Or maybe the engineer just found the first wire in DigiKey that had stock and that was 22 gauge. So these are all things that happen, and we work with our customers to understand the design objectives. But at the end of the day, if you're willing to accept an equivalent wire on your project, we strongly recommend that you add verbiage to your drawings that permits the use of equivalence. Otherwise, you could unnecessarily add cost and time to your project unknowingly. Another interesting thing is the fact that the US government has assigned mil-specs to ordinary UL wires or to wires that approach the requirements of ordinary UL wires. So two specific examples are UL 1213, which is a Teflon wire, is actually equivalent to a mil-spec that also is rated for 600 volts and 200 degrees C. The biggest difference is the mil-spec requires silver-plated copper conductors, where the UL spec does not specify that. So there are instances where customers will specify a mil-spec wire, and for the right application, they can accept and use a common UL wire. This will save time, money, and it's a wire that we can make and get in just a few weeks. The same is true for UL 1015, which is one of our most common 600 volt rated PVC cables. That has a direct mil-spec equivalent, and many of our customers will put the mil-spec on their drawing, and during our quoting process, we'll give them information, educate them, and send them a data sheet. And more times than not, they're willing to consider our UL rated wire since it's form, fit, function identical to the mil-spec. So as we said, what prevents us from using equivalent wire all the time? The truth is, engineering at our customers will specify what they need. And there are times that they don't choose the best option for the program. A lot of reasons for that. As an engineer myself, I know we like to spec in the fancy stuff, right? The best wire that has a great website and a great data sheet, but that's not always the lowest price option and the best for the project. Another thing we see often is that engineers specify the wire that they're most familiar with. They may have used a certain brand of wire on the last project. Maybe it's what they have in stock. And little do they know, if they have to go buy more of it, it's going to be extremely expensive. And other times engineers are busy and trying to get stuff done like the rest of us, and they'll just throw the first part number for a wire on the BOM that looks good and meets the requirements. Little do they know that wire can only be bought in 1,000 or 10,000 foot spools. So some specific examples we've been able to work with our customers on are it's a 2-conductor wire that's made by a couple fictitious companies here. We're going to call them Allen brand and Igloo brand. But on one of these, the wire was rated to UL 2661, and on another one, the wire was rated to UL 2464. These are the two wires that our customer had approved for their application, which was a 30-foot long umbilical harness. Because of the overall length of this cable, the unit price was significantly impacted by the cost per foot. So since Epec has an existing UL approval to produce UL wire per 2464, we were able to recommend a wire solution that was a drop-in replacement and met all engineering requirements. This wire was also 40% or so less than their current solution that they were using. So the benefit here is that Epec didn't need to do anything to requalify this wire. Our customers already had an approval to UL 2464 on their drawing, which means that we can quickly get samples built, shipped, and get the solution qualified and help our customer get their parts out the door. Next, we're talking about some steps to get started with your custom build. So the first is to really understand what you're trying to accomplish, where this is being sold, and what agency approvals you need to bring this product to market. You need to understand where this will be sold and what type of accreditations and product safety requirements you need to bring this to market. Obviously, once system requirements are fully established, Epec can come in and make a recommendation to what makes sense for an appropriate solution. We always suggest before moving forward with a product and a project here at Epec, contact our sales team. We can fill out one of our cable assembly inquiry forms. It captures a lot of the relevant data and information we need. And this helps us move faster and get you an accurate quote as fast as possible. So, in summary, there's a lot of options to consider when reviewing equivalent wire and connectors. But for many of these applications, Epec can cut your cable spend in half using these equivalent wire and connector solutions. Not only are these a cost savings, but they represent a significant lead time savings for our customers. We have some projects today where we have to buy a certain UL wire and it's only available here in the US, and we have to get it and bring it to our manufacturing location offshore and then start assembly. That puts our lead time at almost 6 months to get our customer product, versus we actually have that same UL wire spec available locally at our manufacturing region and can cut that lead time down to 6 or 8 weeks using that wire. It's important to know that there are dozens of UL spec wires that may work in your application already. As we all know, these cables are typically dumb devices. All they're doing is passing power or data from one point to another. The odds are there are several cable types that will work for your application. We always suggest prototypes. We plan for fit checks and we plan to test. It's a way to move forward with low rate production with the least amount of risk as possible. So we always suggest samples and prototypes in all of our build plans. And lastly, and unfortunately, the truth is for some projects, there is no substitute option. And for those, we still have options, whether it's using the drawing specified components or maybe tooling up and making our own. But there are options. Not all is lost, but there may be a little more work we have to do as a team here. So next, I'm going to kick it over to Ryan, who's going to talk a bit about our products, and then we'll go through the Q&A from today's presentation.
Thank you, Stephen. Now, while Stephen reviews the questions that came in, I just wanted to briefly mention some of the additional PCB-based products we offer here at Epec. Printed circuit boards, flex and rigid flex PCBs, cable assemblies, CNC machining, high reliability user interfaces, flexible heaters, and our energy efficient fans and motors. And now let me turn it back over to Stephen to go through some of the questions that came in.
Thank you, Ryan. Okay, so we've got a couple here we can go through. First one here is, what's your most common equivalent wire? I'm going to assume that they mean a UL spec. So the answer here would be definitely our hookup wire, which is rated to UL 107 and also dual certified to UL 1569. This is one of our most common single conductor hookup wires. It's rated for 300 volts and up to 105 degrees C. Most of our customers are using this from 18 to 28 gauge, and we can make any wire jacket color. Obviously, most common are red, black, white, and green, but this could be any combination of color, including striping combinations. The next question is talking about flexibility ratings of our equivalent wire and what we think of our flexibility ratings for the equivalent wire. So typically our equivalent wire will have a similar flexibility to other wires that have a comparable diameter and material. Now, there are higher end, more expensive options out there that do have higher flexibility ratings, but you're going to pay for what you get. A lot of our materials are standard. They will work in these dynamic environments where there's flexing. And ultimately, if you're interested, we can extrude a 5 or 10 foot sample and let you test. There'll be a small lot charge usually for a custom run like that, but we're happy to work with you and get you a few feet so you can test and compare the flexibility to what you're using today. Next question's how do we make sure the latches line up on an equivalent we want for our Molex connector? So that's a pretty common issue we get. So the way we address this is we always suggest building samples. We've echoed that numerous times today during the webinar. But that's especially important before any large quantities are made. So we want to make samples. We'll ship them to our customer. They will mate them with whatever the cable is attaching to, and they'll assess the fit. If for some reason the fit is not sufficient and there's risk or concerns, we then just revert back to the name brand connector if that's an option. Next question is, what's the best D-sub equivalent connector that's low cost but suitable for a high reliability application? So the best way to respond to this is just agreeing that the assembly type off-the-shelf D-sub connectors, if you've built your own D-sub cable, you're familiar with what I'm talking about. It's basically a hood assembly with some connectors and thumb screws. You'll it together with a cable, kind of like a clamshell design. Those can be $5, $10, even $50 if there's something fancy about it. But we discourage using those in our high volume setting because it's expensive. And instead, what we do is we tool up the back shell of the D-sub, and in some cases, we may already have a tool that will work. But what we would do is we would use an overmold to replace that assembly type D-sub back shell, and in doing so, offer a much lower price solution to our customers. So some examples: D-sub cables. We can make a finished D-sub cable for $5 or $10, where some of these may go for $40 or $50. So that's how we'll save the money for our customers. Last question here that we'll touch on here is what do you have for tough and abrasion resistant wire jackets? This would be an automotive application, but relatively low volumes. Typically, we'll recommend some kind of cross-linked polyethylene. It's an XLPE type jacket. That's typically rated for 125 degrees C. The majority of those are rated for up to 150 volts. These values for temperature and voltage are usually sufficient for most of these low voltage applications for work vehicles, off-road type applications. I'm assuming that's what this would be because it's automotive but low volume. And even these cross-linked polyethylene legs, we can bundle them into multi-conductor form, and we also have UL approval on certain flavors of them. So the catch here, though, with these types of wire is there may be an MOQ that applies to each individual wire color. So if you need 10 different wire colors, that may be a struggle. Maybe we can use all black, and that would work for your application. So that's all we have time for questions. Want to thank you and thank everybody for joining our webinar. Apologize about the audio issues we had earlier, but thank you again for your time, and reach out to Epec with any questions you may have.